Yeah, I've got it. The Housing Committee on the Conservation Natural Heritage Protection Bill.
Point of order.
Point of order, Jackie Dean.
Mr Chair, I seek leave for all provisions to be taken as one question for the purposes of debate and voting.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there anyone opposed to that course of action? Appears not. Leave is granted. So the question is that parts 1 to 6 and clauses 1 and 2 stand part.
Mr Chair.
Jackie Dean.
Mr Chair, the Conservation Natural Heritage Protection Bill amends 6 of the main acts administered by the Department of Conservation, and those acts are the Conservation Act of 1987, the National Parks Act of 1980, the Reserves Act of 1977, the Wildlife Act of 1953, the Wild Animal Control Act of 1977, and latterly, and I'll come to that later, the Marine Mammals Protection Act of 1978. So I would like to outline for the committee 5 key aspects of the changes that are set out in the bill. The purpose of these changes is to better safeguard New Zealand's protected native wildlife, public conservation lands and other natural and historic resources. To do so, the changes seek to create effective deterrence against conservation-related offending with a clearly formulated and consistent penalty framework that is in line with the modern era. And so the key changes. To provide significant penalties for illegal activities carried out for commercial gain, a maximum of 5 years imprisonment, a $300,000 fine or both, and an additional fine of $20,000 a day if the offence is ongoing. This will greatly reduce the incentive for such offending. To increase penalties for serious offending that is not commercially motivated, a maximum of 2 years imprisonment and a fine of $100,000 or both. If the offence is a continuing one, there may also be an additional maximum fine of $10,000 a day. To increase the maximum fines for offending by bodies corporate to $200,000 or to $300,000 where the offending is commercially motivated, to increase the penalties for breaches of regulations and bylaws made under these acts to a maximum fine of $5,000 or $10,000 in some specific cases, plus an additional maximum fine of $500 a day if the offence is ongoing, and to improve the court's flexibility to tailor appropriate penalties by enabling the courts to impose a penalty of imprisonment or a fine or both, and providing for community work sentences. I would note to the committee that the bill does not amend the Marine Reserves Act. The Minister of Conservation intends to amend penalties in that Act through a separate legislative process. I want to note to the committee also that the additional daily fines for ongoing offences are amended only where the Act already provides for such fines. The bill does not propose any new fines of this type. So these improved penalties and more flexible sentencing options apply across the 6 acts that I have mentioned. So to go through those acts, Part 1 of the bill amends the Conservation Act as I have described. The new penalties primarily relate to offences committed in places protected under the Conservation Act, but also include offences involving freshwater fish and involving their habitat. The bill increases fines for breaches of regulations only, as the Conservation Act does not provide for bylaws. Part 2 amends the National Parks Act. Likewise, amends the penalties under the National Parks Act. These will apply to illegal activities in all of New Zealand's national parks. The bill increases fines for breaches of bylaws only, as the National Parks Act does not provide for regulations. Maximum fines for breaches of bylaws involving aircraft in national parks are set at a higher level of $10,000, as such breaches are potentially more serious. Part 3 amends the Reserves Act. for all reserves, including those administered by the Department of Conservation, local bodies, boards and other administering bodies. The bill increases fines for breaches of both Reserves Act bylaws and for regulations. The bill sets penalties for national and other reserves at the same level. This is because the new higher penalties provide better scope for courts to take into account factors including but not limited to the status of the particular reserve, the values contained in that reserve and the seriousness of the particular offending. Part 4 amends the Wildlife Act, as I have described previously, Mr. Chair, with some variations which I'll go through. Absolutely and partially protective native species will have their protection increased by the higher new maximum penalties of 2 years imprisonment or $100 fine, or both. An existing slightly higher maximum fine of $250,000 is retained for offences against absolutely and partially protected marine species. Offending in wildlife refuges and wildlife management reserves will have a maximum penalty of 1 year imprisonment or $100,000 fine, or both. Wildlife sanctuaries have higher status and will attract the 2-year maximum imprisonment penalty. Existing additional per-head fines are removed, as these are rarely used. The courts can take the number of animals affected into account as an aggravating or mitigating factor. Aggravating, I would hope. Penalties for offences involving game birds or unprotected wildlife, such as introduced species, are not changed by this bill. Neither are the penalties for failing to report accidentally killing or injuring protected marine life during fishing. The bill increases fines for breaches of regulations only, as the Wildlife Act does not provide for bylaws. Part 5 amends the Wild Animal Control Act, as I have described. So the higher new penalties apply to such offences as aerial hunting without landowner permission and unlawfully releasing wild animals. The bill increases fines for breaches of regulations only, as the Wild Animal Control Act does not provide for bylaws. Part 6 of the Act amends the Marine Mammals Protection Act. Thanks to the work of Marianne Street and the work of the Local Government and Environment Committee in bringing this amendment to the bill, I thank the member for that good work. Higher standard penalties apply to offences including illegally taking or killing marine mammals, harassing them, or using a purse seine net without escape panels. An existing slightly higher maximum fine of $250,000 is retained for illegally taking marine mammals. Changes to the Marine Mammals Protection Act do not change penalties for failing to report accidentally killing or injuring marine mammals during fishing. I've gone through with some length into the changes proposed in this bill. I want to thank the House and the Committee for consideration of this bill and for your support of our special places and species which are backed by this bill. Thank you.
The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Chairman, I'm really pleased to be able to take a call or two.